Good morning, everybody. This is the Wednesday, February 5th, 2025 Jupyter Frontends and Accessibility meeting. I'm your host, Eric Gentry. Welcome to everybody here who's new. We have a couple of items on the agenda, and it looks like the first person is Mike.
Hi everybody. So just wanted to briefly mention one of the pull requests, which is trying to improve the performance of the standard error and standard output rendering. And one of the bottlenecks, there's a couple of those. One of them is that we are converting links, which are just text, into hyperlinks which users can click on. And this is done using a regular expression, which can be suboptimal on some edge cases and very slow on those. So I'm proposing to tweak the regular expression slightly by adding a limit on how long a protocol can be. And I think this is pretty non-controversial, but just wanted to give like a spread awareness of this pull request. According to the registration with the international body which regulates these kind of things, the longest URI scheme currently registered is 36 characters, and I'm proposing to limit the regex to 40 characters, which will give us up to 50 or 100% speed up, also even 50 times on some very long strings. This is not the usual experience for most users, but it will improve the performance a lot. So if you have opinions, if you are using very long protocols and oppose this, please let me know. Otherwise, please approve the pull request if you think that this is a good idea. And my, I will also share the pull request in the chat. My other shout out is to Jupyter AI getting slimmer. And this is because Jupyter AI uses MUI icons, and those were being bundled as a whole into the wheel and the distribution, which meant that we got about 2,500 icons, and we're using only 10 or 15 of them. And this is a problem with Webpack module federation not supporting true shaking in these circumstances. So the solution is documented in the pull request. I know that the JupyterLab kit extension and Jupyter chat also use MUI icons, and using path imports and enforcing them using ESLint, it requires a newer version of ESLint, can reduce the bundle size and the package size tremendously and improve the load speed. So if you have extensions using this kind of icons or other packages, I would encourage you to look into that, because it's a very low-hanging fruit with huge improvement to the performance of initial load.
Yeah, thanks again, Mike, about that, and for pinging me about that. I will push it to Jupyter Chat also. So thank you.
I also wanted to quickly mention that we're already having an issue and are working on doing the same in Jupyter Scheduler. So yeah, thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else before we move on?
Thank you, Mike. I just reviewed it and merged the link scanning one.
All right. Looks like Jeremy's up next.
Yeah. So we have a new notebook pre-release, which is based on the latest JupyterLab pre-release. So it's out there if you want to try it, that would be great. And think for the first time we already have like a Jupyter Lite also pre-release based on this alpha from JupyterLab and Notebook, and it's also available now. I posted a link in the agenda if you want to try it in your browser directly. The nice thing about this release is thanks Mike for reviewing the code console improvements PR, because now we have it in Jupyter Lite, and that will let people customize a bit better their REPL they would like to embed on their websites and docs and so on. They have way more options now. So I'm working on making that also available in docs, and also improving a little bit the handling of the new parameters on the Jupyter Lite. But it's looking good so far. And I think that's it for me. Yeah.
Nick has hand raised.
Yeah, just on that URL thing. This comes up in a bunch of places. There are already a lot of URL parameters that Lab supports that are not really documented. The high road in all this would be to document those in a machine discoverable way, so that if you drop into Lab, you could see what are the things that I could tell my lab when I open it up. So I can tell it a workspace, I can tell it a path, all that kind of stuff. This doesn't help JupyterLite directly because, well, it kind of does, I guess, because some of those things are handled by the JupyterLab server, because they actually do things to the server. And some of them do things in the iRouter interface factory provider implementation. And so but they're also not declarative particularly on that client side. You just like rock up and say like, hey, it changed. Do you want to do something? So this was even discussed on that original PR. It's just we have a lot more URL parameters and the ability to add more, that adopting the Open API documentation standard for that would be really cool. That would be useful as well, just for the server to document those things more. But we would have no way to get that into Jupyter server's Open API documentation, because it's just a static YAML file. So yeah, I just wanted to point out that there is a really good path forward for making our applications more discoverable and interactive. But that's about it.
Can YAML files embed other YAML files?
Oh God, no, please. Yes, you can with refs, but it would still need to know that it's there. So Jupyter server would need a JSON, because it doesn't have to be YAML. And guess what? All JSON is valid YAML. So if they were parsing with YAML, it ain't gonna break. So Jupyter server would need to host that route, and it would need server extensions to be able to say, hey, I am an Open API component. I talk about contents and I talk about kernels. So I'm going to reference those components that already exist. It's a whole thing. Open API is not a simple schema. It's rather complex, but it is the right thing to do.
No, I just mean, could there be a YAML file that records the query string parameters and routes that are special and handled by iRouter, and can be read by Open API so they can be published, but because they're in a separate file, then like something else in JupyterLab, let's say, consumes that file and generates those commands, or something like that, is what I was wondering about.
Let's not ship a YAML parser.
Well, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
But yes.
I mean, a single source of truth that both the server's Open API docs and Labs front end only URL based functionality uses as its source of truth.
Yeah, and the gross way to do that today would be to be in settings, in the settings schema, because that's where we put all of our stuff. I don't think that's a good idea, but that's how you would do it today. Because then it would be at rest on the server. You could find it and print it. If the Jupyter server provided that, it could also provide that, right, and document that. But then actually use it and not let actually dispatch based on that, not the route has changed. Would you like to do something? But that's a rather bigger change. But even documenting it would be good for sure.
Yeah, I get you. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. The other semi-win about putting it in settings is that would encourage parity between the data types and constants and enums and all that stuff that you would use in settings with your API routes, but that gets really messy. So that would not be ideal, but it would be possible.
Nick, if you feel like documenting any of this possible work in Docs working group issues, that would be good also, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it would it'd be a little, well, JupyterLab can do whatever it wants, but the right path would be for that capability to be available in Jupyter server so that this was real. So I am running a server. It's not Jupyter's server, it's my server. All of the things that might be able to do something in there, I should have documentation for that, of the things that I currently have installed. And Jupyter server has no way to do that today. So just like fiating that in a JupyterLab or in a Jupyter Lite, we could show that that is useful and effective. So the concrete case here would be, I'm in a full Jupyter Lite, JupyterLab, whatever thing. I've got an extension that shows me API documentation, and I can build up a new URL for that. One could also imagine this being very useful, for example, in like your NB Git puller. Like those are insane API, those are insane URLs to build. They're totally insane. There's like 3 layers of nesting. And so it's a highly bespoke form that describes it. If a running binder could tell you what it had there, then, I want to make a shareable link that also launches into this particular location and turns this particular mode on. So there's lots of cool things that happen when we describe what our system actually does and then use that to test. So yeah, sure, I'll drop a link or two in.
Cool, awesome. Do we have anything else before we move on? All right, I think Darian's next.
Hi. So if you've been coming to these calls the last few times, there's a persistent conversation happening around the PR that I linked in the agenda, which makes the service manager's individual components pluggable in JupyterLab. And unlike most other parts of JupyterLab, which are swappable by the Lumino plugin system, the convenience wrappers that put everything behind promises and type everything for the REST endpoints of a Jupyter server, loosely, I'm going to use the phrases services, service manager, etc. It's the same thing. Those cannot be replaced by a plugin. Instead, they're required to exist on any subclass of the Jupyter Frontend. Jupyter Frontend is a class that I introduced in 2019, and I think a design decision that I made that was a mistake in 2019 was requiring any Jupyter Frontend application to provide a service manager. And that service manager would have the shape of the JupyterLab one. That I think was too restrictive a thing to require of a Jupyter front end, and too difficult a thing B to replace, because you have to subclass Jupyter front end to do it. You cannot just write a plugin. But of course you can write a plugin if you maliciously want to get rid of it, because as long as you don't care that your plugin isn't like the very first thing to load and isn't the very first time the service manager's used, as long as all you really want is to just listen, let's say, eavesdrop to every service manager request after a certain point, or you want to misdirect a user somewhere, you could easily write a plugin in plain old JavaScript that can swap out the service manager. You just can't write a nice one that other people will reliably get from the moment they start making requests, because it'll be guaranteed by dependency injection. You can only get one that's fit for malicious uses. And so I attempted to fix this a few years ago. Back then, my efforts were shot down by a mix of me making, I think, some hasty design decisions and a concern about security that was raised by Eric Charles. At the time, I did make this counterexample of a plugin that can swap things out anyway, but that was not persuasive, and there were potentially other ways of approaching it, so I let that PR go. I think a year later, Fred attempted a similar PR that also was shot down by Eric's security objections. That time more clearly, it wasn't also a design thing like mine was, because he had a slightly different design. And now is the third time someone's attempting to make the service manager a thing you can replace with plugins, and that someone is Jeremy. And that's the PR that I linked. And Eric objected along the same grounds, but this time we decided to go to the security sub-project, and when they dedicated a whole meeting to talking about this. And we made the case that, look, you already can do the worst things that this PR allows you to do. You just can't do them in a way that's type safe. But I'm pretty sure if you're a malicious plugin author, you're not there for the type safety. You're just there for swapping out pieces. And JupyterLab is a very modular application where you can swap out anything. And we don't notify you when things have been swapped out. You're just allowed to disable an extension if you wish, because we assume that this is a composable thing that you're either deploying or you want to use yourself. We're hoping that the deployment you're using with all the plugins it comes with are good plugins that don't harm you, but we're not vetting any plugins. So because we had this conversation with the security sub project, we thought that it was resolved, but Eric said he found their reporting back in that same PR unsatisfactory, and he also had two other objections. So he said he wanted either the author, Jeremy, or me, because I was, I think, the counterlocutor there, to call a vote. And so I didn't really think this required a vote. We don't normally vote on PRs, but I did open a discussion poll in the JupyterLab Council repo, which all members of the Frontends Council can see, because I figured if we do have a vote, we can do it in this way in the discussions and then publish the results instead of having a public name with a yes or a no happening asynchronously, so you can see how your buddies voted and how your boss voted or whatever. Like those, that we've had this conversation before, so I thought this was maybe a good time to have a private discussion with a secret ballot, like, you know, democracies, and then publish the results like, you know, democracies. But Eric read the decision-making guide and said, no, you're doing it wrong. This is an invalid vote. And he said that because it was a secret ballot. But I read the decision-making guide too, And I agreed with him that it wasn't a valid vote, but the reason it wasn't valid was because nobody had seconded the call for a vote. Specifically, not me. I disagreed with it. But not because it was a secret ballot. There's nothing in the decision-making guide about that. And so we were kind of at an impasse, and no one came forward in the past week to second his call for a vote until earlier today, when another member of the Frontends Council, Fred, did second Eric's call for a vote. And Eric called a public vote, which again, I have my own objections to, but it is a way we've done things, so it's okay. And before I could respond to the text on there, we're having this call. But really, that vote in our Team Compass that Eric Charles has called just represents his objections to this PR. It doesn't present any case for, which maybe that's fair, maybe it isn't. I think it is difficult to make a sympathetic case for something you don't believe in, as you might be hearing from me trying to make a case. But nonetheless, it is completely devoid of any pro. It's just Eric's 3 objections. And despite seconding it, we can see Fred's vote. Fred abstained. Again, I think that's objectionable. It's not nice to see what people have voted and to think about that. I really think having the privacy of a secret ballot allows you to make your own decisions instead of seeing how others are doing it. But I started writing up what I want to put in that vote so that people can make a decision, and so that I could ask basically to fine, have the vote and vote, please vote yes. So here is my write-up. I'm going to paste it in the chat here, but it's just a private gist. And I'm going to take the contents of this private gist and I'm going to put it in a comment in that vote. I was just editing it still, and I didn't have time to finish before we began this call. So that's why I'm sharing it in this weird way. But by the time you plan to go to that Team Compass link, it should be there. But effectively, I take the 3 objections that Eric raised and I respond to them in similar terms to what I just told you guys. And I give a little bit of the context of where this even came from. And frankly, if I had had a bit more foresight in 2019, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I would have made the Service Manager a plugin. It would have been a special kind of plugin because it is, at the core of your data connectivity. So it probably wouldn't have been exactly a Jupyter Frontend plugin. It would have probably looked a lot like Jeremy's PR, but that's how I would have originally written it. It isn't how I wrote it. Here we are 6 years later having the conversation. But I would like to fix this mistake that I made that one time. So I urge you to please vote yes on this issue. And I also would propose, it's not so nice to call a vote on a pull request because you don't like it, despite the fact that lots of discussion has happened around it and there doesn't seem to be other people objecting to it. But it is within the bounds of the rules. I just I'm not sure I see it as a very compelling thing to vote on. But rules are rules. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure Jeremy is too, as he is the actual author and has much deeper understanding of this PR.
To add a bit more context, the reason we've been talking also about this PR for the past, I don't know, maybe month, 2 months, is that we'd like to move on with Jupyter 4.4. And this is also kind of blocking the beta release in a way, because we would like to have it done before moving to the beta cycle.
I would suggest anyone who is on the Frontends Council and a bit intimidated by all of the unfamiliar code they may not have looked at, to please go abstain so that we meet quorum. I'm pretty confident that there aren't a group of objectors who've been laying low and quiet this whole time. I'm pretty confident that the people who've been thinking about it are either one prominent objector or vaguely in favor or actually in favor or abstainers. That's actually what I think the breakdown looks like. If you fall into any of those categories, heck, if you're the second objector, I would be interested too. But please vote on this one so it can be resolved, because one failure mode of the previous Jupyter governance was that anything could be derailed basically by one veto and things would get stuck for a really long time. This is something that, you know, someone worked on and spent time and effort on. And normally we don't subject the things that contributors contribute to a vote. This time we're in the unfortunate circumstance that we are subjecting this to a vote, but please let's make it a timely vote with an actual resolution.
Do we have any more questions or comments here?
I just wanted to ask if anyone has decision-making guide pulled up. Could you send a link into the chat so that like all call participants could give it a look? Thank you.
I'm happy to share that. I don't think the decision-making guide, here's the decision-making guide in the chat. I don't think it's really relevant here because irrespective of whether I think a vote is warranted or not, I'm proposing we just do it. We follow the procedure as is. Me personally, I don't think we should have come to this, but we have. And this is a vote, and Eric's entitled to call votes, and Fred is entitled to second the motion. And Eric was entitled to write it in whichever way he wished, and I am entitled to write my own counterpoints whichever way I wish. Presumably so is Jeremy, although I don't think he's going to flood you with spam the way I am. So, you know, the decision-making guide might be helpful in adjudicating whether our previous disagreement has an answer that you agree or disagree with. But that disagreement is kind of set aside for the moment because we now have a vote being called and we're just doing it.
No problems. I was just more towards, you know, so that if people who haven't participated before so would know just what we're talking about and could give it a look.
All right. I think Mike has another point for the agenda.
Yes, because this is the first meeting of the month, we're supposed to have some time looking at accessibility related issues, and I wanted to call out 2 pull requests. Out of one of these pull requests, I believe is on the call, so this is just adding some ARIA labels. If you, I saw that Rosie already reviewed that and mentioned to mention that on the on this call, so I will skip that and just link that. Is it? I don't want to mispronounce, but Reshop. If you'd like to go after me and describe more how these changes can improve accessibility, feel welcome to. And I wanted to focus on the second pull request, which I linked, which is adding an optional toggle for workspaces in the top bar. I added some suggestions on there regarding accessibility, so basically followed the guideline from ARIA on how to document, like how to annotate a combo box list with autocomplete. I think I did that right, but because the code that we are using slightly differs from the example, if anyone has opinions on how ARIA annotated things should be, or would like to test that pull request sometime further down the line, I'm just highlighting that there is a new toggle with cool accessibility features that need to be enabled for it to be properly rendered for screen readers.
Yes, I would love to share my PRs with you all. I just added few missing ARIA labels, which were failing few tests in the IBM accessibility checker, and now they are passing. There's uh, nothing much more than this. I can link it in the chat here.
Thanks for your work on that.
If you guys have any feedback, I would love to hear them.
So here's a question, which might be very silly. I see that many of these labels are like lowercase. I guess it doesn't matter for screen readers if it starts like from uppercase letter, or would it matter for translators? Or I don't know.
Isn't that is case sensitivity? I thought that was part of the HTML spec, right? That the attributes are not case sensitive. Is that right?
Well, attributes are not, but the contents of the attributes. So in the title, you would usually start with an uppercase letter.
Okay.
At least that's what I think is the convention for English.
I will just mention that I did note that, but I took a look around some of the other labels and I didn't see a consistent usage. So I didn't mention that in my comment, but I saw some lowercase and some uppercase throughout the code.
I think in general we tend to use title case. And also there's a typo. The word panel has a typo. I'm just adding two little. So I would suggest you changing these to be title case with the first letters of uncommon words capitalized, but like things like or and or the sometimes are not, depending on where they fall. Yeah.
Sure, I will update the PR accordingly. Change these to the title case.
So
Thank you.
I've just Googled and someone suggested that it shouldn't matter if it's all lowercase or camel case or sentence case, but it might be for some screen readers if you do all capitals, that it would read them out as individual letters.
All right. Thanks for the extra context. Do we have any other comments or questions here? And I'll do a final call for anything anybody wants to discuss on the record before we move to end the recording. All right. We'll stop the recording and go to the off the record portion. Brace yourselves.